I love this guy because it's too bad we don't have a massive whiteboard because he'd probably fill that sucker up. Dr. Jamie Richards is co-founder and CEO of Life by Design. He has an amazing practice out in Ontario, Blenheim. Pretty amazing football champions out there. And he has a wonderful office space, gym space, restaurant all in one, so a beautiful 10,000 square foot facility. I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Jamie Richards. He's going to get right down into the numbers and the nitty gritty. Here we go.
Woo, let's do it. All right, thanks, Brian. So I was thinking about, the tone of today. Yesterday was a great day, by the way. It was great to have, a day where we could really get into some of the weeds and the numbers. It was great to hear Alain speak and Heath. And my sentiment today, and really what I was feeling, lines up very well with, what is the most underappreciated, ignored practice success metric? We talk about retention and conversion rates and revenue and profit, and all those things are very, very important. Today I'm feeling that sense of gratitude. I look over the room and it's a blast from the past in many ways. Standing, putting on the mic, and I saw Tim Wood come in. I haven't seen Tim in 10 years. Tim and I think we lived together, did we not, Tim? For a short period of time, right? Brad Gage and Norm and all these people I went to. Our class had Lawrence Tam and, James was at school when I was there, John Minardi, Ryan French. It was a pretty incredible time when you look back and think about, that moment. And I said yesterday, one of the things I love to do is I love to speak. I really do. And not to say I forgot that. I do that in my practice on a day in and day out basis. I do that online on a day out and day out basis. But one of my real core values is to present, to speak, to teach. And I think way back, this is probably 2013, I had a chance to speak at Lyceum in New Zealand. And Brian Lanew's here. Brian and Tay were students at the time, and they were in the audience, maybe 1,000 people, 1,500 people. And I was so excited because Reggie Gold was going to be there. And Reggie is one of my mentors. We really have tried to forward his idea of third paradigm chiropractic and bring it into a business model and a business structure that chiropractors can use. And he actually passed away a couple months before. So I missed that opportunity. And I know this may sound weird. I'm sure James, if he's in the room, hears this. Oh, you influenced me in my life. And same thing. This is my first chance to speak on the same stage as James. And, I'm just grateful is how I'm feeling right now. And it ties into what I want to talk about today. Yesterday was a lot about numbers, so we'll get back to that, and I want to give some context to that today. In fact, let me ask you, who did their homework last night? Who did their math homework? Oh, all right, we're gonna briefly touch on some of this because there's context, and I want to talk about, well, what's the success metric we didn't talk about yesterday? The math homework we talked about really comes down to this real basic. If you weren't here yesterday, I want to hit these really quick. Number one, you don't have to be very good at chiropractic to make a very good living as a chiropractor. You can make a lot of money as a chiropractor. In fact, you can be in the 1%. We went through this yesterday. The 1% in Canada, bottom line is $275 net pre-tax, middle of the road $500. Do the quick math on that. $60 a visit, 50 weeks a year. You're $175 to $250 a week if all your numbers work out. You're in the 1%. So my point is, using revenue or profit in this sense is fine, but you can be a mediocre chiropractor and be in the 1%. So I don't think that's a good enough criteria to push chiropractic forward, right? We get lazy, we get complacent, and a big part of that is because you can be mediocre as a chiropractor and be financially well. And that's just the reality. My point yesterday was you can do that in two models. You can practice in this model that the vast majority of people do, and it's not an indictment, it's not you're a bad person, just that the standard is to have a 200 visit a week practice. To sustain that, you need about 20 new patients a month. I'm saying that's not true. I'm not saying everybody's capable of doing it right now, but it is possible for everybody when you understand how to do that. That was yesterday. Build a retention-based practice, create a reputable marketing infrastructure that brings the right people to you, learn to make agreements with people. You can have a practice that sustains volume at 5 new patients per every 100. So yesterday's project was to go through that. And so here's the quick stats I want you to to have in your mind forever and ever and ever. 5 for every 100 is sustainability in a retention-based practice. I know that sounds crazy to people. Acceptance rate's 80%, but acceptance means we're starting and we're finishing a set period of an agreed upon time. You should have a 95% acceptance rate, completion rate. So everybody that you say yes to and they say yes, they should start and finish, whether it's 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks. I don't care if it's 4 weeks or 12 visits. Whatever the agreement is, if there's a yes and it goes in both directions, they should complete that time. And if they don't, you find people dropping out, then there's a lot of holes that can be filled there. At that point, when we have a sit down, we make new agreements with patients, 85% is a reasonable acceptance rate into the next phase. In fact, I'd like to see it even higher, but I think 85 works across the practices we've seen. 90 after that, and then annually, our annual turnover is about 98%. So that means, I went back and I looked at my numbers again, and I just want to reinforce this. It's not about my practice. And I said, hey, we had in the last 2 years, inactives 32. But I want to give context to that. 32 is not a lot, but that's only the new patients that would be in those 2 years. So I looked, we had an additional 70 inactives. So let's look at this. 273 accepted cases. That means they started and they finished at least one phase. 93% moved on, 96% moved on, and we lost about 100 patients over the course. So that's a mix of patients in those 2 years and then other older patients that came and went. But here's the net effect. In a 2-year period, on 11 and a half new patients a month, okay? 11 and a half new patients a month, we grew a net 165 visits. The total revenue in that time for those is somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000 increased growth. What I'm telling you is that a retention-based practice is possible. That's all I'm telling you, is you can do it. There's the blue ocean if you want to go down that path. It's possible. But there's a step beyond that. There's a point that's primary to figuring out all your stats and your details. And that's really what we want to get into today, is what is the success metric that really, really matters? And I'm very passionate about this concept. It's near and dear to my heart. And I think for some of you in this room, it will absolutely, and I don't use this word lightly, transform not just your practice, but more importantly, your life. And that sounds like hyperbole. It's so big. It's a claim that's very difficult to substantiate. But I'm telling you, in my experience, not just myself, but the practices that we work with, when you take a step back and you get into the number one success metric that truly matters, and you challenge whether you're achieving this or not, and then you modify and morph your life, your action steps, based around this one metric, I'm going to tell you, and I guess this is a bit of a warning, something is going to change. You are going to leave here today, this weekend, and if you do the work that we'll go to in the next 42 minutes, something is going to change. Now, that change may be very, very uncomfortable, very, very scary, and I'm imploring you to do the work and to see where it takes you, and to be able to look back in 10 years and say, holy shit, I am so happy I made a change. I'm so happy I pivoted in this direction. What I'll tell you, though, is it may look very different than what you have in your mind right now. And all the other conversations we're having today, extremely valuable, Alain, Baron, and protecting chiropractic. I mean, that really connected with me. And where I want to take this for my presentation is there's a step that needs to be done inside yourself so you can do all the things that the other speakers are talking about. That's the place I'm going to be able to help you today. So it's not new patients, it's not more visits, although these are good markers, revenue, referrals. It's not chickens, but I'm going to tell you a story about how I got to figure out what this actually was. So I started practice in 2002 in Ontario, came out of school, fired up, passionate, as if no one would ever leave my practice. Has anybody ever felt like you would start practice and on day one you'd be perfect, like the perfect practice, and nobody would ever leave? I legitimately thought that. Parm was talking about blocking out where he was doing his renovations. I had paper on my windows, same thing. No permits, nothing, just in there scraping up old floors from a pizza place, getting the practice ready. And on the outside of the paper said, I think something along the lines of, your life is going to change. Of course, like written in marker, right? And I was so committed to bringing this message of our chiropractic to my community. that when I started in practice and recognized that people didn't understand what I was explaining, even though I thought I was great at communicating and passionate, didn't stay, didn't convert, and it took me about 30 seconds in practice to realize not everybody was going to stay. And that was painful for me. Actually, in fact, very triggering. I was married in chiropractic school and then got divorced. And it was a shocking experience for me. My wife and I were together 10 years. We were married 4 months. And then it turned out that, it wasn't going to work out. And so I do have this deep, if I'm being vulnerable with this group, a very deep pain of people leaving me. And maybe that's to everybody's benefit. We developed the retention-based practice method. And it's really been wonderful because very few people leave my practice. And so, there's some good and bad that has come from that. In this scenario, in practice, I couldn't figure it out is what was happening. And of course, going back to the drawing board over and over again and just really, what do I do? And I was very deep into the Reggie Gold tapes, if anybody ever remembers, the philosophy tapes, and listened to them back and forth. And I memorized every single talk that Reggie did. I just did for, I think, the AFC. I just did Valley of the Blind on a video for 40 minutes. Like I was embodying Reggie Gold, and I thought, well, this is going to be the way. But of course, the one thing I took from Reggie that I really shouldn't have was his business model. And so I had this feeling that, well, if I just bring chiropractic to everybody, and everybody gets chiropractic, then I'm going to be okay. And so, I would take chickens, I would take loaves of bread. I know other people have been down this path, and I was really trying to embody this idea of a box on the wall practice. But in Ontario, you can't have a box on the wall, right? You have to have a financial record for everybody. So I found a workaround. At one point, I was allowing patients to choose their own fees. I have literally done everything wrong that you could possibly do in practice. Hey, think about this. I remember Sharon McIntyre walks up, and the month before, my fee structure was a mess anyway. It was $90 a month to come as much as you want, and $150 if you bring your kids. I was still using the fee structures that Reggie talked about on his tapes from 1975. I'm like, oh, I'll just do what Reggie's doing. It's going to work. If I have 1,000 people times $100 a month, I'm good. And so Sharon McIntyre came up, and let's just make this note, I was also the CA. I couldn't afford a CA, so I was the chiropractor, and I'd walk behind, I'd do the checkups, then I'd run around front, and I'd go to the front desk, and I'd do the checkout. I said, hey, Sharon, we're doing something different. I want to make sure everybody has access to chiropractic, and so nobody's going to be financially restricted. I'm going to allow my patients to choose what they want to pay. How much would you like to pay this month? And talk about uncomfortable for Sharon, right? Sharon was the same as last month, I guess. Oh, whatever you want. And it was an extremely embarrassing situation. And so I thought, okay, well, let me figure out the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And so I started looking at other practices and thinking to myself, why is this guy over here, this gal, so successful? They're seeing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And I realized that the people who were truly successful, and we're going to break this down a little bit, it wasn't that it was about numbers or revenue. It was really that they were happy. And I know that sounds like a metric that is not measurable, but I'm going to give you some inner understanding of how happiness is created and how we can then reverse engineer that in our practice. And what this ended up doing for me is it really changed my perspective on what I wanted my practice to look like and be like. And I loved what Baron said about not liking old people. I like old people. In fact, they're really great in my practice because they pay cash and it's wonderful. But my point is that you can have whatever practice you want. I said yesterday, you're not everybody's chiropractor. Chiropractic is for everybody, let's be very clear. But you're not everybody's chiropractor. And my colleague, Dr. Cratio Jug, coined that, but I'm just thinking back and seeing Tim over here, and I remember it was Frenchie, actually, who said, because I'm going through all that stuff in school. What if I learn acupuncture, and what if I do? And he was like, look, acupuncture is awesome. He goes, but it's not chiropractic. And I said, well, what if they need it? He goes, well, they can go to an acupuncturist. Like, where does it stop? Are you going to brush their teeth for them? Are you going to cook their meals for them? Like, where does it stop? And so you understand that, okay, I get to pick what this is. And so let me give you a definition for happiness. And if you write anything down this weekend, I would write this down. This is by far one of the 5 statements that have transformed my life. And along with the one I talked about yesterday, reality exists, this really defines what I attempt to use to guide my life. So if you're thinking to yourself, I'm not happy, because this was what was happening for me. I was doing everything I thought I was supposed to be doing, but I wasn't happy. And even at higher volumes, granted I was collecting, $13 a visit in my box, 200, 300, 400, all these visits, I wasn't happy. I was tired, and I was driving my Corolla with no window in the back, but that's not the point. The point is I was not happy, and I couldn't figure out why. And I came across this quote, or kind of this definition of happiness. Happiness is the emotional reward for pursuing your values. Happiness is the emotional reward for pursuing your values. That's it. Now, it gives me goosebumps saying it because it really resonates with me. It's changed a lot of the direction I've gone in my life. It's led me to really ask extremely difficult questions, which I encourage you to do, which will yield some very, very difficult answers for you. And you will be faced with these decisions of, am I going to lean into that and work towards that? Am I going to move away from that? And it's okay wherever you end up with that. That's a process. Certainly, true in my case. But happiness is the emotional reward for pursuing your values. So how do we start to apply that? First off, I want you to think about, and even write down in your own time, the times in your life when you are happiest. Like physically, emotionally, feel happiness. Emotions are an effect, okay? They're not a cause, they're an effect. So, we're stuck in this mental health crisis and everybody's trying to get happy. They're an effect, and we're trying to change effects. It's no different than patients coming in and wanting to, treat a symptom. It's a symptom. If you would like more happiness, what you need to do is identify what your values are. And this gets, lip service at a lot of chiropractic and personal growth seminars. I want to make it tangible for you and give you the steps. Happiness is the emotional reward for pursuing your values. And so you can look at all the places you are most happy, and you will start to identify what some of your values are, even if you don't have the names of those. The flip side, and sometimes the easier way to identify your values, is to figure out what your anti-values are. Meaning, a lot of us know what we hate, right? We're very clear about the things we don't like. I don't like A, and sometimes it's specific to practice. I don't like old people, right? I don't like them. And so they're not part of my value system. Important is to figure out what your values are. So let me give you the definition of a value. A value is something you would like to gain or keep. So I'll give you examples. Health, clearly a value. Financial abundance could be a value. Career advancement could be a value. Relationships could be a value. Right? A lot of times when people think of values, they think of hardworking, and those are more virtues and character traits that you would use to achieve your values. But what happens is you have these values, and one of the assignments we do with a lot of our clients is I give them an activity list. I say, great, I know your values now. Why don't you write down everything you do in a week and allot a certain amount of time to it, and identify how much time you're spending on different things. And what ends up happening is some of the values that clients will have, they're not spending any time or minimal time. And they can't figure out why they're not happy or why they're not successful. Right? And my position here is that if you are happy, that is the primary metric for success. Right? If you were to fast forward your life to the end and say, well, I'm wealthy, but I'm unhappy, or I have enough for whatever it is that I want, but I'm extraordinarily, unbelievably happy, which of those two would you like? Now, they're not independent. They don't have to be separate, but for some of you, they will be. And this is why values are individual. And here's my challenge with chiropractic practices. We get up here and speak, and I say, hey, you should run a practice like this, and everybody's talking about how to do it. But it needs to be an expression of you and your values. And you'll notice when you're trying to live somebody else's life or pursue their values, you are not happy. One of the things I do think is important, and this might be a contrary statement to what most people at a chiropractic conference are going to hear, and it's a very core position and value system for us at Life by Design, and that's, it's not your job to save chiropractic. I'm not saying we shouldn't contribute. I'm going to contribute, Baron, and you can hold me to that so you see my name and email and my credit card coming in. There are part of my values that say I need to support organizations that help support the things I want to do, 1,000%. But look, chiropractic doesn't give two shits about you. I'm sorry to say that. It doesn't. For a long time, I thought I had to save chiropractic, one spine at a time. And I had, my biggest day in practice or our best month financially. And you know what happened? Nothing. Nothing. Has anybody had that experience? You had an amazing day, and then you walk out and nothing happened. Like, it literally looks the same outside your office. There's still people loitering around, doing whatever they're doing. Nothing has changed. Not to say nothing changed for the people who come to see you, but you go home, your kids are still your kids, your wife or husband are still. Life did not change because you saw 100 visits in a day or 200 or whatever your goal were that you had in your mind that said, well, this is what success looks like. And what happens is you can end up going down that path very far, and the further you get, the harder it gets to unwind that. Now, I talked about this yesterday, and I think at this point most people know who I am, but what you're going to see behind me, Parm already commented about the Life by Design Center. What I want you to understand is that's my expression of my values. I was in Australia 10 years ago, and I was speaking at DG, and on the plane back, I had this feeling of, look, if we're ever going to move the needle for Life by Design, I need to be able to embody that the way I have it in my mind, 1,000% with no restrictions. So I landed, and I called my brother on my flip phone. I called my brother on my Nokia red flip phone, and I said, do you want to buy a practice? And he said, sure. And so we negotiated a practice sale. He bought my practice. I said, do you want to buy my shares in the gym? We had opened a second gym. Sure. So he did all that, and my wife at the time, pregnant wife, we had just built a house or a cottage an hour away. We bought a building. Well, actually, it's not true. We rented a building and put $300,000 into leasehold improvements in a building we rented because we believed in what we were doing. We've since bought that building, thankfully. But the point is this. When you see this, this was my moment where I said, these are my values. And if I keep going down this path, we had a great practice in London, great community for Life by Design, 2 gyms. It was great. But I wasn't happy. And so I made the tough decision to say, you know what? That's it. I'm going to go in a different direction. And so, this Life by Design Center, if you will, it's just me. It's our expression of everything we want to do. And I talked about the metrics yesterday, and this is not to say, apparently you're allowed to brag. Heath gave me permission. So, I work 3 days a week in practice. I personally work 1 day. I have associates that work another day and another day, but they have full-time offices in London. So making my pitch for an associate again, I need 2. So if anybody wants to move to Ontario, work in the center, we can fill you up, and you can have a 6-figure salary in no time. But the point is, our practice is going to do just under $1 million in revenue on a 3-day-a-week practice on 140 new patients a year. This is my expression of my values. You're going to figure out what yours is. And your practice should be the DNA of you. And if you haven't taken the time to actually go through this, what happens is this. You're pursuing somebody else's values. And we all have probably seen this quote many, many times. Pat Gentempo would always share this quote. Huge fan of Ayn Rand. Contradictions lead to destructions, and the degree of contradiction equates to the level of destruction. I've seen that to be 100% true in my life. I've seen that to be true 100% in other people's lives. That when there is a contradiction, the larger that contradiction is, the greater the destruction that happens. I always see this in my mind as vectors, like a math problem. If you have 2 vectors and they're lined up, you get a resultant force, and that's very powerful when those are lined up. But if you actually misalign those even slightly, your resultant force is reduced, correct? And you create friction. And so this is what happens in our life, is there's even the smallest degree of contradiction that you're going to have this destruction. Of course, it's going to be to that level and that degree. So going back and actually thinking about these things is powerful. We hear it as imposter syndrome. I think of it as, I used to call it the Sunday sickness. Did anybody ever have that? You practice Mondays. You can be honest. I would stew Sunday nights. Like, I can actually feel myself getting clammed up talking about the Sunday sickness right now. Having to go to practice on Monday, knowing it didn't align with my values, knowing I wasn't happy, but I had to go. I had bills to pay. I had people to take care of. I had responsibilities, and I was trying to figure it out, but I was sick to my stomach. And there's people in this room I know for certain, to some degree or more or less, depending on where you're at, you are sick to your stomach. And on the surface, you may say, well, I'm so successful. And we look in the mirror and I'm so successful. And in many ways, those metrics, revenue, profit, patience, that's great. It's wonderful. It's certainly nice to not be poor. Right? That was also one of my other favorite Pat Gentempo quotes, is one of the best ways to help the poor is not be poor. And I completely agree with that. But not in the sacrifice of being unhappy. And so, I would wake up on Sundays and just be like, oh man, tomorrow's the day. And what am I going to do different? How am I going to make this work? And what I've seen, this is my real beautiful drawing. I did this in April with Parm and his group, and I've really developed it since then, Parm. Really developed this graphic here. But it's important because here's what I see. So I'm looking across the profession. I'm thinking to myself, all right, we've got these happy docs. And again, I don't know the inner workings of everybody, and I'm sure lots of docs that appear happy maybe aren't, and vice versa. But here's what I see, and you can take this for what you will. I think if I'm projecting some of my thoughts and values on you, the dream practice is not the one that has been talked about from this stage, not just today, but everywhere. Thousands of visits a week. That is for some people who that matches their values, and that is wonderful. And those who have that value and had that practice or have that practice, they are probably very, very happy. And that's great, but they're the unicorn, all right? On the bottom, we have happiness. On the top, we have volume. Now, you've got a group of docs in here that are super happy, but they have shitty practices. It's just because they're new, right? Like you literally just got out of school or you just started a practice. But you're pumped. You're like, I love chiropractic. It's amazing. It's everything's matching my values, but I'm just not seeing a lot of people yet. And that's okay. In fact, they're happy, which is fantastic. Then you've got what I think are the majority of chiropractors. Personally, this is my experience. Somewhere between, this line here is about 100 visits a week. Right? What's the average visit volume for practices in Canada? Is it maybe 75, 100 visits a week? In that ballpark? I don't even know. But I doubt the average is higher than that. So let's just use this as a midpoint line. The majority of practices fall somewhere between 75 and 125 visits a week. And it's probably a fucking grind. It's like every day is Sunday sickness over and over and over again. And then there's even docs here, though. There's docs here, very unhappy docs. But the point is they're cranking out the volume, but it's not matching their values. Somebody told them along the way, like, this is what is success, and they did it. And that's even maybe the scarier part is they did it. They did the work, they put the time, the energy, effort, and they got to the mountaintop, and they're still unhappy. That's probably worse than being over here. Here is a group. I mean, there are some docs for sure, and I am enamored by that group. 500, 600, 700, 1,000, whatever the number is, and they're legitimately happy people. Good for you. Honestly, good for you. We need more of that in the profession for people who line up with that value. That's great. I'm telling you where I think the profession can really thrive for most doctors, where they can have this harmony of, here's all my values. Some of them are business, some of them are personal. Here's what this practice looks like. I already said, you can be in the flippin' 1%. The 1% at a 175 practice. So let's say, forget about the 1%, we want to be the 5%. I think, right here, if you do the numbers on I hate the name boutique practice, but let's say you run a practice that's 125 to 175 visits a week, even at 150. The numbers on that, you're doing $250,000 a year or just under in net take home. But you also work 3 days a week. So if you have other shit you like to do, you're going to have time to do that stuff. And you're going to pursue your other values. You're going to be a happier person. You can also take that practice, especially when it's in a retention-based model and you're doing 5 per every 100, right? 5 new patients for every 100 in a sustained phase. Growth phase, I would double that to get there. But you can scale this. You want to go from here to here? That's possible because you've nailed in the retention. You've nailed in and dialed in the reputable marketing. You're having people show up because they want to be with you in your practice. You can add associates. Or you cannot. Or you could not. You can literally move to Italy like Brian and Taya someday and have your 100 visit week practice and make $250,000 and travel around Europe. You can do whatever you want, but it has to be what you want. And Baron, again, great presentation, gave you permission. I'm giving you permission. Have whatever practice you want. It doesn't actually matter. It's for you. It's not for chiropractic. Look, end of the day, we need to protect chiropractic. On board with that. But we cannot predict where chiropractic is going to go. But I can predict this about your life. You're going to die. It's going to happen. It's a guarantee. And in 2019, my dad passed away. And if anybody's had a parent pass away, there's a mortality that sets in, right? You're like, oh, man, I'll be 50 this year. and it's far from, old, but certainly 50, if that's the half point of my life, which would be amazing, have I done enough? And not just enough in practice and enough in my community, but have I done enough with my kids? Have I done enough in the other areas of value that I have? Have I given enough thought to the things I really want to do and pursue in my life? So how do we do this? How do we put this into play? And this is what I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes talking about. These are all parts of a larger process in our Practice Accelerator program. In fact, we're just about to drop our updated chiropractic productivity system, where a lot of this stuff is in there, so you'll have to look out for that in the next probably 4 weeks. So what's the first step? It's identify your values. What are the things I'd like to gain and keep? And I'm going to show you some of mine so you can get some examples. Number 2, decide what you want. I know this stuff sounds so elementary, but here's what people do is they skip all the foundational work. It's like the ads yesterday. Remember I told you and showed you the infrastructure? Clicking the buttons on Facebook is easy. You just go into the Meta Ads Manager and you go, start an ad, click, 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 put up a video, put a post, type some copy, send them to it's not complicated. What's complicated is doing the groundwork. What's my messaging? What's my core product? How do I test the messages? How do I come up with viable messages? What are the variations? Am I doing a conversion ad, traffic? There's the details, but the underlying work is where it's at. So, fast forward not doing this. Every day, who has a list of things to do? Be honest, I have a list. What if that list has little to no connection to the things you want most in your life? Is there something more devastating than working your ass off towards something you don't know that you want? And then you get there and realize, I got there, but I didn't want this. I wanted something else. So we have to go back and do the groundwork. And so identifying our values, deciding what we want. We spent all day knowing the numbers, and nobody did their math homework. So go back and do your math homework. Know your numbers. Do you have a retention-based practice? Yes, I do. Well, what are some of your retention statistics? Well, I think most people say, know your numbers. I asked somebody yesterday, what's your CPA? What's your cost per acquisition? I'm not really sure. Well, then how do you know how much money you can spend marketing if you don't know how much it costs to acquire a customer? You have to know your numbers to make decisions that are based in actual data. What business, what legitimate, strong, successful, thriving business functions without knowing their data? None. It's a requirement. For chiropractors, I would say install a retention-based practice method, become profitable, and then use the profit from your practice to feed your values. Here's the purpose of practice in my world with my values. I love chiropractic. I love making sure people's spine and nervous system is healthy and optimized. I love ensuring that what I love to call, and you could tell me if I'm right or wrong, I feel like I came up with this term, but maybe I didn't. We use this terminology in the practice, making sure the neurological nutrition is feeding the brain. I love that idea, right? It obviously goes back to a lot of James's work with afferentation and sensory input, but I needed something that was communicative to my patients. We call it neurological nutrition. So let's feed your brain with neurological nutrition, just like you feed your body. But the point is, my practice, although I love what I do, the goal of it is to create a profit center for an exchange of value and then leverage that profit center into building wealth. Part of it goes back into the business to sustain the business, right? In our market, we charge the highest price of anybody in our entire market. Why? Because we feel we deliver the best service and experience. We feed a lot of money back into that. I pay my staff very, very well. My associates have 6-figure salaries. Why? Because it's not about me taking all the revenue. I have enough. I want it to grow. I want it to thrive. I want the experiences to be great. But that's part of my value system. And then taking that extra revenue and then going into that either passive or other business wealth building phase. So this is what I call the Dream Life Project. So step 1, identify your values. We talked about. These are my values. All right? And so this is inside our perfect life planner. Not that life can be perfect, but we can certainly shoot for that. This is inside the perfect life planner. And you can see here values. So not everybody's OCD like me and wants a mission statement, but I did come up with this. My life is my number 1 value. I actually believe that you should be far more selfish than you are. We tell our patients, you got to take care of yourself to take care of your kids, but we don't do the same as chiropractors. You need to be selfish. A selfish person who properly applies their values will be a far better mother, father, child, business owner, contributor to society. It's okay. You're allowed to put yourself first. Reason, purpose, self-esteem, health, family, aesthetic, freedom. This was something I do every 90 days. A lot of times my values never change, but at one point they did. They changed during COVID. Freedom was not one of my values that I recognized at the time, so I want to tell you a story about how your values really change your actions if you let them. So my wife's American. She's born on the Jersey Shore. Her dad was a chiropractor. We met at CalJam, is how we met, is the story, on an elevator. And so here we are, many years later, and being an American, you know, freedom. She's, yeah, strong freedom, right? She's a freedom fighter. And COVID was hard, really hard, for everybody. We recognize that. And she said, we need to get the fuck out of here. And I have goosebumps thinking about it. Here's what happened. Okay, I had an associate at the time, great guy, and the vaccines happened, and other people probably had this experience. I started feeling really ill, and I ended up actually taking about 8 months off of practice. And I don't know what happened, quote unquote. And anyway, back on track with that and no problems, but here's the point. We moved to the United States. We were like, all right, that's it, we're all in. Negotiated with the associate, the center, like the amazing thing you just saw, because freedom was such a value for us. We said, you know what, fuck it, we're changing. We're going a different direction. And that's hard. But we had everything there. House went up for sale. We bought a house in New Jersey. We bought a house in Florida. It was all going to happen. And on the day of, my kids are in school in New Jersey. I get a text. And again, I'm not beating up on my associate. He's still a good friend. He's still part of Life by Design, and he's a great chiropractor. But look, here's the point. Let me just say this. It didn't match his values. And he made a really difficult decision that at the time affected me. But we're better off for it today. But what happened was he texted me, said, can't do it. You know, I think it was, I need to talk, which is never good, you know, especially when your wife texts you that. It's like, we need to talk. So something about me. So he said, we need to talk. And got on the phone and just, you know, wasn't going to work. And so I had to tell my wife. Her family lived there. My kids were in school. We had 3 houses that we couldn't afford. And the practice big check wasn't coming that day. And I mean, it was crushing. Just, again, emotions, just feeling what that was like. And so we had to pack up the car and drive back and figure it out. And we did. And we figured it out. And we've since sold all those houses and reestablished and brought in chiropractors and grown the practice 30% to pay for all the things we were not bringing. It was great. But my point is, that didn't work out. So I'm telling you this not as a warning. Pursuing your values is difficult. That was a difficult decision. And I'd love to tell you it was amazing. But it wasn't. It didn't work. But you know what? In retrospect, I'm happy because I took the shot. It was my value and my wife's value that we went for, and it didn't work, and we've reestablished ourselves, and we've moved on. And so, again, it's not always going to be good. You know, we teach a Think by Design workshop in our practice, and 4 or 5 times we've had people get divorced after going through the Think by Design workshop. I just teach the values is really what it is. People quit jobs, change schools. Some of you are going to make some tough decisions about your practice in your life. And so the second thing you need to do is create your life vision, not your practice vision, your life vision. This is probably one of my favorite parts of this Dream Life project. This is just my whiteboard or yellow board in my practice. If you've seen any videos, sometimes it's behind me. You need to know what your life costs. So part of the Dream Life project is when you approach it from your personal values first, then you identify what those values are, then you start to say, look, here's the life I want to have. Forget about practice right now or any other business. Here's the life I want to have. What is that life going to cost me? Like physically tangible money. How much is that going to cost? That's a part we often skip. And so here's a couple caveats that we find. Number one is that most doctors, when they dream up their dream life, it's not Lamborghinis and Ferraris and private islands. So you're probably not that far away from what your dream life really matches up to in your mind or for your value system. So that's step number one is, here's my dream life. And then also I suggest people do their current life. And what you're going to end up with is you're going to have a couple numbers. One of them is you're going to have a gap between where you are today and where you'd like to be. So that's valuable. You can say, okay, how am I going to bridge that gap? Where am I going to get my revenue? Is it going to be my practice, other businesses, other endeavors? You can define whether your current life is way too expensive for, you know, the amount of money you're bringing in. But what I like about this, most importantly, is it gives you a number. So example, revenue sources. This version of a dream life, you know, is going to cost whatever. Where's mine? So there's another tab over here for current. My current dream life costs about 30 grand a month. That's my life cost. I need to make 30 grand a month, and that pays for everything in my current life. Now I've got some big goals, so my dream life, I'd like to figure that out. Not there yet, but that's on the path. Here's the deal though, where am I gonna come up with this? Now we've got different projects and different things, but I only need my practice to pay me 20 grand a month, okay? I've got associates, I've got other people, because I only wanna work one day, right? So that's just part of my dream life. Here's the point. We have a number in our practice. I know the number. You know, I think back to Mike Gibson, who's one of our other directors, owners, founders of Life by Design. His number was 213. And when we started with Life by Design, he would say 213. I said, what's 213? So this is the maximum number of visits I'm gonna see. I said, why? You know, why wouldn't you want to see 1,000 visits a week? He goes, because I only need to see 213 to have the life that I want, with the time I want to spend seeing patients, and I have all these other values that I'd like to pursue. So I think when we're creating our practices, and I gave you that example of the different styles of practice, you need to give some consideration to what you actually want your life to be, not what you want your practice to be. How many visits a week should we see? Oh, 300, rah, 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 I've got a great practice. Why? Why is it, where did that number even come from, 300, 400, 1,000? Somebody's always gonna see more than you, and no matter how many they see, the world's still gonna be the same when you walk outside. Those people's lives are gonna change, so let's not doubt that. But you wanna make sure that your practice lines up with your life based on what you want. Again, these are just coming up with the actual data. These are our goals for the year. This is 25-year vision, the 1-year vision. We've eclipsed this already. Again, just figure it out, reverse engineer it from what you want in your life. And then what you need to do is you need to start making it tangible. And this is part of the productivity system. You know, taking the day in and day out tasks and, you know, putting them into project lists and figuring out, you know, what you're gonna do. And this is one of my favorite sheets. This is our daily focus sheet. How do we take our values, our vision, and our plan, and then make it real every day? So every day I pull out this sheet and I map it out. Oh, hey, all right, what am I going to do in the first 90 minutes of my work period? I'm going to be doing an associate ad, and I had to do something else. What am I grateful for today? What are my daily 5? I want to make sure I'm moving the needle on the 5 things that are going to get me one step closer to the things I want to create and have, but they need to be connected to my values. They can't be random things that you're just putting on a list. And then at the end of the day, what made today great? And then over here is my schedule. It's not complicated, but here's the deal. It is deeply connected to what it is that I want in my life. So I know in 90 days, in 365 days, in 5 years, in 10 years, what I'm not gonna do ever again is look back and say, I went in the absolute wrong direction and I'm not happy. So you might be asking yourself this, how do I, practice in this retention-based practice? I wanna see 12 new patients a month. I wanna, work 1 day a week. I wanna make $1 million. I wanna make 500,000. I wanna travel. You don't do anything that I just showed you in terms of, I'm gonna do what Jamie's doing. Understand that this is my expression of my values. And I look at the other people here today, and of course I know certain people, and James is gonna get up here and speak next. Clearly, it's an expression of his values, right? It's what he wanted to do and the directions he went, because that's what was important to him. And if you wanna be happy, you have to define that in your life, and you have to figure out what that is, and then you need to put it into play. So Reggie Gold, and I'll end on this. So Reggie Gold, does everybody know Reggie Gold? I honestly feel crazy asking that question, but okay, we don't have time to go back and talk about who Reggie Gold is, but Reggie Gold, you can look it up, told an amazing story. Really, if you want to be inspired, go back and look on YouTube for Valley of the Blind. It's probably my favorite talk ever that Reggie Gold did, is Valley of the Blind. And at the end of that talk, the whole thing's incredible, but at the end of that talk, Reggie finishes with his mic drop moment where he said, on this day, paraphrasing, on this day, the world's last chiropractor died. The funeral was unattended. Powerful. Goosebumps. Reggie's message was that chiropractic is on its way out unless you save it. I already said I love Reggie. 40 years later, chiropractic is still wavering. You can make the case it's going one way or the other. Baron already did that. I don't want chiropractic to die. That's not something that is on my list of things to do. But I'm going to tell you, in thinking about this today, it's not my greatest fear. In fact, it's not a big enough fear for me personally. This is up to you to define. For me personally, based off my values, to define my life. I'm going to tell you what mine is. Dr. Jamie Richards died today, amassing massive wealth. He left the world the greatest retention-based practice, left an incredible impact on his community, and set a standard for the profession. He died early due to health complications, friendless, absent any relationship with his ex-wife Dana, his daughters Andy and Scotty, and their children. It's all going to end, guys. It's all going to be over at some point. What is your legacy going to be? All the other steps beyond that. How do we help chiropractic? How do we, get better at A, B, C, and D? All very, very important. But the first thing you have to do is get to a life where you are aligned with what is important to you, not anybody else, what is important to you, and then express that. And every speaker has said the same thing. Take that and then take that to the world in your version, in your variation, and you will be better, the world will be better, than if you're trying to mimic something that somebody else wants. So what I want you to do is get clear on your values. Don't wait to take action on those values because you're risking everything for things that don't matter. On the flip side, you can have it all. You simply have to act accordingly. Thank you.